What's going on, guys? Ben Brewster here, treadlegs.com. This is the single leg hinge with internal rotation. So it's basically the rotational hinge that we talk about in terms of being able to load up that back hip as you move down the mound. We're using this in this case as kind of a mobilization, as kind of the last step in an internal rotation mobility progression, but it can also be used as somewhat of a teaching tool to teach athletes that don't understand how to hinge into that back hip. They just kind of lunge down the mound. They don't understand that it's a coil into the back hip and into the back glute. They think it's just a sit or it's an extension, but really it's a coiling of that pelvis over top of the femur, riding that down the mound, and then unloading of that pelvis into landing. So it's both a mobilization but also a patterning focus. So what we're going to do in this case is just take about a 1/2 inch to a 1 inch band. You can wrap it around a pole. You might need 2 bands, 3 bands in this case to have enough length to work with. The other thing that you can do, if you have, there's a couple straps that we like. One's called What's That Strap? Another one's called, I believe, the Vaso strap. We will link that down below. You can also use a core velocity belt. It's a little pricier, but it gets kind of the same idea as far as tension on that back hip, trying to pull you open into pelvic rotation. And so the point of this is we're basically teaching our body to resist that rotation, counter it, and rotate the pelvis closed over top of that back femur. So any of these options can work. We're just showing kind of the cheapest, easiest option, a few $10 bands looped around a pole. So Devin's going to demonstrate this for me. So just start facing so they can see. So you're going to step into the band on the back leg or the leg that you're focusing on with the band coming in front of your waist. So that's the first move. From here, all you got to think about is you're doing a 360-degree turn away from where the band is anchored. So the band's anchored there, he's just going to spin 360 degrees, and that's the finish point. So pretty simple if you just take those 2 steps. So now what's happening? Well, now the band is trying to pull his pelvis open. So this is basically a cue that he's wanting to resist. So for him to apply tension to the band, he's going to have to rotate his pelvis closed. And ideally, as we're going to be doing some of these different variations, that foot is staying still, that knee is staying still. It's a relatively fixed femur, and he's going to have to learn to rotate the pelvis over top of that femur and feel that hip wind tension into that back hip. So as he's doing this, as he's rotating, he should feel like there's a winding of those tissues in the lateral hip. So the first one, the easiest thing to feel is just to do kind of a pseudo RDL or like a split stance RDL. So what you can do, you can either set up like a foam roller right around here to reach towards, or you can just cue yourself to reach cross body. But all he's going to do is think about reaching and coiling over that hip. So as he's coiling, again, he's rotating the pelvis over the femur, and he's winding into internal rotation. Notice the internal rotation doesn't mean that the knee has to collapse into valgus like this. That's a misconception. You can have kind of that vertical shin position, that stable foot position, and still wind into internal rotation. This is still internal rotation, adduction of the femur. So that's going to be the first progression, just the basic RDL version. He's using the torso, he's using the T-spine as kind of a driver of that internal rotation, so he's getting more than just the pelvic rotation. He's also adding in that reach to really cue that winding action. So that makes it really easy to feel. The progression from here, because obviously when you throw, you're not winding all the way down and reaching all the way down. The progression is to take the torso out of it and still see if you can wind the pelvis over top of the femur and still get that mobilization. So what he's going to do is he's going to pretend, you can either pretend you're like actually throwing a ball, or you can just hold your hands in front of your sternum and think like quiet torso, but it's the same idea. It's, hey, can I wind over the back hip with the pelvis and feel that tension building in the back hip? So he's just going to put his hands at his sternum. You can also hold like a roller, hold something here, so that as you coil, it teaches you to keep the torso quiet versus just rotating everything as one unit. So anyway, this is basically level 2. It's can we take the torso out of it, keep that quiet, and still teach our body to coil that pelvis over the back femur. And again, if you're not buying this as far as actually applying to your delivery, you can at least think of this as a closed chain hip internal rotation mobility drill as kind of the last sequence in a series of internal rotation drills. From there, if you want to progress this to more patterning, you would do that same coil feeling, but as you wind tension, you're then going to let that take you forward. So you're winding tension to the back hip, and then as you hold that tension, you're going to let that center of the body, or as Lance Wheeler likes to call it, kind of riding the middle of the body or riding the center. You're going to let that move, that coil, take you into a forward step. So he's winding tension, and then he's just stepping. Winding tension, holding that tension as he moves forward. Winding tension, moving forward. Okay, so that's the third progression. From here, there's kind of an endless variety of things that you can do to get comfortable with the unload phase if you're going to do this from more of a patterning standpoint. So what you can do, one easy step up from this is just to do medicine ball shot put throws. So we're not going to have him demonstrate this right here, but he can do the coil, the forward move, and then it would just immediately turn into a shot put throw. So you can understand how to get from that coil to that linear move, to that unloading of the pelvis, to the blocked front leg, and sequence that energy flow up the chain. So this is kind of like the very most basic regressed way to teach that rotational hinge in little bits and pieces. You can do shot put throws, you can do scoop tosses, side tosses. You can actually do throwing drills out of this. The core velo belt can be a really good option. Again, it is a pricier option, but you can actually do throwing drills with it and attach the band in such a way that it is cueing you to feel this rotational hinge and then unload it into the throw. So we'll do this with plyo drills, and we will use kind of the band option for guys who don't have access to a core velo belt, or we will use the What's That strap or the Vaso strap option as well. If you have access to like a Kaiser machine or a cable machine, you can do these very same progressions with that strap. So a ton of options here, but the fundamentals are the same. It's learning to, in a closed chain environment, which is what pitching is, as far as how the pelvic actions work. It's learning to coil that pelvis over top of the femur, wind tension, hold tension as you move forward, and then unload it into landing. So that's really the final progression in your internal rotation series.